Okay, Rabbi, we're on DAF Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. We're on the 6th line. And if you recall, we had a machlokus in our Mishnah as to whether a Yom Tov going into Shabbos has the status of Kedusha Achas, that it's one unit of holiness, or whether it has the status of Shtei Kedushos, it's two distinct units of holiness, and therefore that'll affect, the ramifications are with Eruv Tchumen, can I make two separate Eruvim going in two different directions, one for Yom Tov and one for Shabbos, or must I make only one Eruv, which is only going to be going in one direction, serving both days? On that we have, we had seen this statement of Rav Yehuda before, Amar Rav Yehuda, Irev Beraglov Biyom Rishon. We're going to see this is sort of a side discussion having to do with the issue of Hachana. We talked a little bit about Hachana yesterday as well, whereby we saw that according to Rabbi, anything that is not prepared on Chol is not usable on Shabbos. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Irev Beraglov Biyom Rishon Ma'arev Beraglov B'Sheni. That using this Yom Tov going into Shabbos issue, if a person made an Eruv with his feet on the first day, let's say Thursday evening, then he would also he could make an Eruv with his feet, and he has to make an Eruv with his feet if he wants to be able to extend the Tchum on Shabbos. Irev b'pas b'yom rishon ma'arev b'pas b'yom sheni. Similarly, if he used a food parcel like bread on Thursday for the first day, then he can make an Eruv with bread on the next day for Shabbos. Irev b'pas b'rishon ma'arev b'raglav b'sheni. Third case is that if he made an Eruv with food, like with bread, for Yom Tov, he can make an Eruv with his feet for Shabbos. Meaning, you remember we talked about yesterday, there are two ways to make an Eruv, either with sending a shaliach to put down food for you, or actually standing there during the Bein Hashmoshes period. The fourth case is Irev b'raglav b'rishon ein ma'arev b'pas b'sheni. In this case, if you made an Eruv with your feet, you didn't use food on the Thursday evening, then we don't give you the opportunity to use food now, to introduce food for the first time on Friday afternoon going into Shabbos in order to make your Eruv Tchumen for Shabbos. Why? She'ein ma'arvin batchila b'pas. Because you're not allowed to create an Eruv on Yom Tov for Shabbos. And as Rashi explains, this is a chisaron. The deficiency here is the issue of Hachana. That you have to prepare an Eruv from before Shabbos on a weekday in order for it to be usable as an Eruv on Shabbos. If it was only designated on Yom Tov, so then like we learned before from Rabbi, who taught us yesterday, that we learned from the Mun that the only things that are usable on Shabbos are things that were prepared on a weekday. And the same thing applies to an Eruv. And that's why, if you didn't have this food prepared from before Yom Tov, on Chol, you would not be able to use it as an Eruv for Shabbos. Irev b'pas b'yom rishon ma'arev b'pas b'yom sheni. So, and again, if you made an Eruv with bread on the first day, you can make an Eruv with bread on the second day. So on this, Amar Shmuel, uva osa hapas. So Shmuel says, in a consistent fashion, when you use the bread for the second day for your Eruv, you have to use the same bread that you used for the first day. And the Gemara says, Amar Ravashi dika nami masnisan. The Mishnah implies the same principle as well. The Ketani, Keitzad hu osam olichu barishon umachshav alav v'notlo ubalo v'sheni machshav alav ochlo ubalo. The Mishnah had said as follows. The Mishnah had said that, if you recall, when we talked, even according to the Chachamim who say that you can only make an Eruv in one direction for both days, they had said that what you should do is you should put the food down on Thursday evening, let it stay there for the Bein Hashmoshes period, then come and pick it up and take it home with you. And then take the same bread and put it back down on Friday afternoon to have it act as the Eruv for Shabbos. So you see that the Mishnah itself is advocating using the exact same bread, because you cannot use a fresh loaf of bread because it hadn't been designated as an Eruv from before Yom Tov. What? Oh no, because it was already previously designated as an Eruv from before. So you're doing, so the Hachana on this bread, that's the whole point. This loaf was already designated as an Eruv from before, and that's why it's not a Hachana from Yom Tov to Shabbos. So the Gemara now says, the Rabbanan, so what about the Rabbanan? Now what this Rabbanan means is, we had a discussion with Abai and Rabbi yesterday, who had questioned our Mishnah. who said that it wasn't clear in our Mishnah, this whole principle of Hachana. That it's not clear from our Mishnah, this whole idea that the Erev has to be prepared from before Yantif. Well, why isn't it clear? It should be it's implicit in the Mishnah. So the answer is that Dilma Hasam Eitzatova Kamash Malan. The reason why it's not clear is because you could interpret the Mishnah as just providing you with good advice, not telling you that there's a halachic imperative to use the same bread that you used Thursday for Friday, but rather, if you want to be able to only use one loaf of bread and be able to eat it afterwards, this is the eitzah that we give you, not because it's halachically required, but because you'll save money this way. And you won't end up losing the loaf of bread that you put down Thursday night, you'll be able to use it again Friday night.
So when he designates the Arab with his presence, he has to make a declaration. So when he came the second time and did it, he doesn't make a declaration? He doesn't need to do it the second time?
Well, if you recall from the Gemara, there's no verbal declaration required. You just have to put it down.
No. His feet. When he's doing it with his presence. When he walked there,
right,
he has to make a verbal declaration?
No, we saw yesterday from the Gemara just the opposite, that you don't have to make a verbal declaration. As long as you're aware that you're sitting there or that you're standing there for the sake of Erev Tchumen, you don't have to make a declaration.
So then why?
We had said that it's problematic to make a declaration.
So why did we can't not do it when we bring food the first day, and the second day, why can we not
use brand new food?
No, his feet, his presence. We said, and just finished saying that the second day he cannot make the Arab by walking there.
No, just the opposite. Just the opposite. If you put the food down on Thursday, right, you are allowed to make the Arab with your feet on Friday. Oh. You are allowed to. The only thing that you're not allowed to do is if you made an Arab with your feet on Thursday, you may not make an Arab with food on Friday because you had not prepared this food from before Yantiv as an Arab. That's all we're saying.
In the last case that was just discussed, if your come shvisa by putting the food there before Yantif and then over Yantif it gets eaten before you get there, it's still a good Arab, but you don't have the bread now if you want to move it, and if you're using the same bread. If you have to use the same bread, then, or same food, whatever it is, then how can you do?
If it would get eaten Thursday night or Friday morning, right, so then you'd be out of luck according to what we're saying. You wouldn't be able to use a new piece of food. Right. Correct. Yeah. I mean, you could, however, designate 2 loaves of bread, or you could, according to what we're suggesting now, if you want, you could interpret the Mishnah as not requiring you to do this from a halachic standpoint, but just as an eitzah, in which case you could use a new loaf of bread. Okay, let's go on to the next Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rosh Hashanah. Now the previous Mishnah was dealing with a Yom Tov going into Shabbos or Shabbos going into Yom Tov. Here we saw there was a machlokus between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. Rabbi Eliezer had said that it's shtei kedushos, it's 2 distinct units of holiness, and the Chachamim said that it's 1 unit of holiness. Now we're going to discuss a similar 2-day holiness case, which is going to be the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rosh Hashanah Shahaya Yarei Shematis Aber. If you're concerned that maybe they're going to make it into a double Rosh Hashanah. Now, the reason called it's a misaber is very, very simple. It's because Elul is normally a 29-day month. Okay? It's very rare for Elul to be 30 days. So therefore, we normally anticipate that the day after the 29th of Elul is going to be Rosh Hashanah. In temple times, we were Makadesh al pi ha're'iyah. We sanctified the new month and the new year based upon the testimony of witnesses. So almost always, almost without fail, the witnesses would show up on the day after the 29th of Elul, and they would tell you that we saw the moon last night and today is Rosh Hashanah. However, the problem was, the question is, how would they do the sacrificial service in the Beis HaMikdash? They did the sacrificial service as follows. They would bring the Tamid Shel Shachar, the morning Korban Tamid, and the Levium who would sing a song together with the Korban Tamid would say the weekday song, because usually the witnesses would not arrive until after the Tamid Shel Shachar was brought. Then, at some point over the course of the day, the witnesses would come, they would testify that they sighted the new moon, and they would declare today to be Rosh Hashanah, and they would make sure to instruct people, today is Rosh Hashanah, there's a prohibition of doing malacha. That's normally the way it worked. If the Edom never showed up, then they would automatically declare that the following day would be Rosh Hashanah instead the first day of Tishrei. There was once a situation where the Eidim came after the late in the day, which was very unusual, but they came late in the day, already after the Tamid Shel Bein HaArbayim had been offered. And the rabbis had a bit of a dilemma. Rashi explains that since they had already offered the Tamid Shel Bein HaArbayim and the witnesses had not yet come, so they established the Levim sang the song of the weekday song, and then the witnesses showed up and they told them, no, last night we sighted the moon, and today is really Rosh Hashanah. So the rabbi said, because this is very confusing, we're going to make a policy. Anytime the witnesses come, min mincha ulamayla, if they come in the afternoon, when it's already the time to offer the Tamid Shel Bein HaArbayim, the afternoon Karban Tamid, we will not accept their testimony, and we will automatically push Rosh Hashanah to the next day. However, they made another provision, and they said that's provision number one. Provision number two is, they said, but nevertheless, if the witnesses do come in the afternoon, we will still instruct the people to refrain from doing malacha for the entire day. Because even though today is technically not Rosh Hashanah, because tomorrow is Rosh Hashanah, we don't want people to think that it's completely a weekday, because in future years, people will disregard and will deprecate the Kedusha of Rosh Hashanah, thinking that it's not really Rosh Hashanah today, but tomorrow is going to be Rosh Hashanah. So that's how the whole concept of a 2-day Rosh Hashanah came into effect, is that they decided to make today Rosh Hashanah, as far as the Kedusha of it being there is a prohibition of work, plus they made the following day Rosh Hashanah as well. Now, this is all going on in Eretz Yisrael, and that's why the only 2-day Yontif in Eretz Yisrael, even though there is no such thing as a 2-day Yontif biblically, but the only 2-day Yontif in Eretz Yisrael is Rosh Hashanah, because of this concern of the Eidim coming min mincha ulamayla in the afternoon. Now, a person who's living in Chutz La'aretz during temple times has no idea what day the Eidim have come. Have the Eidim come on the day after the 29th of Elul, or did they not show up at all? And therefore, a person who's living in the diaspora is always going to make 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, regardless of when the witnesses show up. And that's what our Mishnah is addressing, is that if a person is worried, Shahaya Yorei Shematis Aber, he's not sure, maybe Rosh Hashanah will be tomorrow, and maybe therefore Rosh Hashanah is both today and tomorrow. So Ma'arev Adam Shnei Eruvin. So then he would have to put out 2 Eruv Tchumen, one for today and one for tomorrow. But at the same time that we require him to put down 2 Eruvs, because it's only 2 days Yontif Mishum Sveika Diyoma, because he's not sure which day is really Rosh Hashanah, then he has the option of making 2 Eruvs into opposite directions. And therefore he could say, Va'omer Eruve Berishon Lamizrach Uvesheni Lamarav. And he can say, my Eruv today, for first day Rosh Hashanah, will be in the east. My Eruv that I'm putting down for tomorrow will be in the west, because either today is Rosh Hashanah or tomorrow is Rosh Hashanah, and therefore you can split them and you can say that they're 2 units of holiness. Barishon Lamarav Uvesheni Lamizrach, or vice versa. You could say that today the first day is that my Eruv is going to be in the west, and for the second day Rosh Hashanah my Eruv is going to be into the east. Or you could say Eruve Barishon Uvesheni Kivnei Iri, or Eruve Besheni Uvarishon Kivnei Iri. You also have the option of saying that I only want the Eruv to work on one of either the first day or the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and the remaining day I want not to have an Eruv at all, but I want to have 2,000 Amos in all directions without extending the borders at all, just like anyone else in my town. So that's what Rebbe Yehuda says, that Rosh Hashanah has the same status as Shtei Kedushos, as 2 distinct units of holiness. You can divide the Eruv for day 1 differently from day 2. V'lo hodu lo chachamim, and the chachamim did not agree. And we'll see why. More we'll discuss this. The Odam of Rebbe Yehuda further said, based on his stipulation that Rosh Hashanah is 2 units of holiness, that he said, Masna Adam ala kalkala b'yom tov rishon va'ochla b'sheni, that a person who has a basket of produce that is tevel, that has not yet been tithed, he can actually set aside a portion of the produce and say, now we know that you're not allowed to tithe on Yontif. So he can say, look, either today is Yontif, either today is Rosh Hashanah, or tomorrow's Rosh Hashanah.
Okay.
If today is Rosh Hashanah, then the food that I'm setting aside is nothing. I'm not tithing it. I'm just putting it over to the side, and I'll wait until tomorrow. And then the second day of Rosh Hashanah, he says, if today is Rosh Hashanah and yesterday was Chol, so then the food that I put aside yesterday was my tithe. And if today is Chol and yesterday was Rosh Hashanah, then the food that I put aside yesterday, I want it now to be Truma. So basically, he makes this conditional statement so that Mimon Avshach, no matter how you look at it, he's properly tithed it by the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and therefore he's allowed to eat it. And v'chein beitza shenolda barishon te'achal b'sheni. And the third thing Rabbi Yehuda said is that if an egg is laid on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, you're allowed to eat it on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. Again, based on the same principle. Even though an egg that's laid on Yantif is considered to be nolad, it's muktzeh, because it wasn't prepared from before. But Rabbi Yehuda says, look, mimon afshach, Rosh Hashanah is either today or it's tomorrow. If the egg is laid today, and today is Rosh Hashanah, then tomorrow is a weekday, so I can eat it tomorrow. But if today is not Rosh Hashanah, then it's had proper hachana. It's completely non-muktzah, and so therefore, for sure, then tomorrow I can eat it. So on all three cases, the case of ERU, the case of Tevel, and the case of Beitza, v'lo hodu lo chachamim. The chachamim disagreed on all three. Rabbi Dosa ben Hurkinis Omer, and he says another halacha having to do with Rosh Hashanah. Ha'over lifnei hateva b'yom tov shel Rosh Hashanah. That if a person is leading the davening, he's the chazan on Rosh Hashanah, one of the prayers that he should say is, Omer hachalitzenu Hashem Elokeinu es yom Rosh HaChodesh hazeh. Im hayom im lomachar. So on the first day of Rosh Hashanah he should say, hachalitzenu. So hachalitzenu could be translated in a number of different ways. It could be translated as deliver us, but Rashi explains that it means zorzenu, which means make us have passion, make us excited, make us stronger, fortify us, right? So hachalitzenu means that make us sort of empower us, Hashem, on this day of Rosh Chodesh, whether today is Rosh Chodesh or tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh. And then ulamacharu omer im hayom im emesh. And then the second day Rosh Hashanah he should say the same terminology, except he should say whether today is Rosh Chodesh or whether yesterday was Rosh Chodesh. And on that, v'lo hodu lo chachamim, the chachamim disagreed with him. Now it could be they disagreed with him for one of two reasons. Either they disagree with him because you're not supposed to make mention of the fact that we're mesupak, that we're in doubt as to whether today is Rosh Hashanah or tomorrow is Rosh Hashanah. In the davening, you should treat both days as absolutely Rosh Hashanah. Or it could also be that the reason why they disagreed with him is because you're not supposed to make mention of Rosh Chodesh on Rosh Hashanah. That on Rosh Hashanah, the only thing that you mention is that it's the first day of the year, but not the first day of the month. And we'll see why, and the Gemara will clarify this tomorrow. The Gemara now says, Man lo hodu lo. Yes.
That means that they didn't light the bonfires. How could they light bonfires if it's Rosh Hashanah then?
They ate them.
Yeah. What did they do as far as notifying the rest of the people in Eretz Yisrael? I think that they were able to get the word out to everyone in Eretz Yisrael in time. Here we're talking about a person who's in Bavel and therefore has no way of knowing. It seems like from the Gemara, at least the way Rashi learns the Gemara, that this is only a concern in Bavel, in Chutz La'aretz. In Eretz Yisrael, you know whether there's going to be one day Rosh Hashanah or 2 days Rosh Hashanah, probably through the bonfires, but I'm not 100% sure. So, man lahodulo. So now the question is, what does the Mishnah mean when it says that the Chachamim didn't agree with him? Who are the Chachamim? Amar Rav, Reb Yossi. It's Reb Yossi, who is of the opinion that Rosh Hashanah has the status of 2 days Rosh Hashanah, status of 1 unit of holiness. Tanya, Modim Chachamim LaRebbi Eliezer b'Rosh Hashanah, Shahaya Yorei Shematis Aber, Ma'ariv Adam Shnei Eruvin, Va'omer Eruve Barishon LaMizrach V'Shein LaMarav, Barishon LaMarav V'Shein LaMizrach, Eruve Barishon V'Sheni Kivnei Iri, Eruve Barisheni V'Rishon Kivnei Iri. That the Brisa says that the Chachamim, and here we're saying the Chachamim is Rabbi Yehuda, they agreed to Rabbi Eliezer that even though the Chachamim hold that a Yom Tov going into Shabbos has the status of one unit of Kedusha, 2 days Rosh Hashanah where you're Mesupak, which day is really the real Rosh Hashanah, then it has the status of Shtei Kedushos, of 2 distinct days of holiness, and therefore you make 2 separate Eruvin in 2 different directions, or only an Eruv for one day, but not for the other day. And on that, Rabbi Yossi says no, you can't. Because Rabbi Yossi says that even the 2 days Rosh Hashanah is the din of Kedusha Echas, 1 unit of Kedusha. So Amar Lehen Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi Yossi presents his argument. He says, Iatem modim she'imbo edam in hamincha l'maylo shenogin oso hayom kodesh u'lamachar kodesh. Don't you agree that when the Eidim would come in the afternoon, the Chachamim would say that no one can work on this day when we were expecting the Eidim to come, plus no one can do Malacha tomorrow because tomorrow is the really Rosh Hashanah. So Rabbi Yossi says, you see that even in Eretz Yisrael, they made an absolute 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, so it's Kedusha Echas. It's not Shtei Kedushas. That's his argument. There's no such thing. It's not like Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golios. It's not like 2 days of Pesach, where a guy who lives in Golos, you're not sure whether today is Pesach or tomorrow is Pesach. Here, even though the Beis Din has established that tomorrow is Rosh Hashanah, it's the 1st of Tishrei, they nevertheless forbade us from doing Malacha today as well, and therefore they made a solid 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, even in Eretz Yisrael. So you see that it's different from a Safek Diyoma, Sfeika Diyoma. It's different from a normal case of doubt. Here there's mamish 2 days, and therefore it should be treated as one long holy day. So the Rabbanan hasam ki hechi delo lezilzulei bei. And the Chachamim's response to that, to Rabbi Yossi, is no. Rosh Hashanah in Eretz Yisrael is not 2 days of Yom Tov, Midrabanan. It's only 1 day. We know exactly which day is Rosh Hashanah. It's the 1st of Tishrei. The Chachamim only made a decree that people should refrain from doing Malacha, not because today is Kedusha, not because today is really Rosh Hashanah, but if we allow people to do Malacha now, after the Eidim have come and we've refused to accept them, and we're only going to make Rosh Hashanah tomorrow, then in future years, people will deprecate the institution of Rosh Hashanah because they'll say, well, it doesn't matter when the Eidim come, tomorrow will always be Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, the rabbis made a rule, and they said that no matter what time the Eidim come, even if we're going to make Rosh Hashanah tomorrow because they came late in the day, we're still going to treat this day with an Isser Malacha, not because it's Rosh Hashanah, but to prevent people from deprecating Rosh Hashanah in future years. And it's based on that the Gemara says that the Chachamim, which is Rabbi Yehuda of our Mishnah, they hold that really Rosh Hashanah is only 1 day, and it's only because of Sfeika Diyoma that a person in Galus would not be sure, and that's why you can always make 2 Eruvs and treat it as Shtei Kedushas. By the way, we paskin like Rabbi Yossi, that Rosh Hashanah is Kedusha Echas. Ba'od Amar Rabbi Yehuda v'chulei. Rabbi Yehuda further said that this idea of Shtei Kedushas for Rosh Hashanah has ramifications not only for Eruv, but also for a basket of Tevel, and for an egg. So the question is, once you've established that Rabbi Yehuda holds that 2 days Rosh Hashanah Shtei Kedushos, why do you need 2 other examples of the ramifications? Just I can infer one from the other. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why you need the other 2 cases. The ashmi inan, because if I only have the reisha of the case of Erev Chumin, bahakama Rabbi Yehuda mishum deloka avid midi, only over there by Erevin where everything has been set up from before Rosh Hashanah, maybe there Rabbi Yehuda is liberal and he says, fine, you can have one Erev work for one direction, another Erev work for another direction, because you're not doing anything on Yontif itself. Avol kalkala demexi kemesakein tivla imamodu hula rabbana. But when you're dealing with a basket of fruit, where you're actually making a declaration of tithing, both on the first day and on the second day, maybe Rabbi Yehuda would agree to the Chachamim, since you're doing something physical and declarative, maybe he would agree that it's problematic, and he wouldn't allow it. And if I only had the first 2 cases, which was the case of Eruv and the case of Tevel, maybe over there would Rabbi Yehuda say you can be lenient and treat it like Shtei Kedushos because there's no additional concerns. But by the BAYT Shenol de B'Yom, we're going to see this in greater detail when we learn Maseches Beya, but we're going to see that there was not only a concern about muktzah when it comes to a newly laid egg on Yantiv, but there was an additional reason, two other additional reasons why the rabbi said that you should prohibit an egg that's laid on Yantiv. Why should you prohibit it? One is because if we permit you to use this egg on Yantiv, the rabbis had a decree and they said any fruit that falls off of a tree on Yantiv is asur. If an apple falls off of a tree on Yantiv, you're not allowed to eat the apple. Not because it's muktzah, but for a separate reason of shema ya'ale v'yitlosh. That maybe if we let you eat the apple that fell off the tree, you may be tempted to climb a tree and pull off an apple off of a tree and do a malacha. Similarly, the rabbis were concerned that if you have juices that flow from a fruit on Yantif, you're not allowed to drink those juices independent of the fruit. Why? Because if we let you drink juices that float on their own, you may be tempted to squeeze fruit on Yantif, which would also be a malacha of dash or sochet. So therefore, the rabbis made a rule that an egg, which is similar to a fruit that falls off a tree in one respect, it's also similar to juices that flow from a fruit in another respect. In other words, it comes out of a chicken. So therefore, they said that an egg is prohibited because it falls under the rubric of one of those two decrees. In the same vein, so therefore, the Gemara says, you might have thought that Rabbi Yehuda would agree that you have to be machner by an egg, even though he's liberal by the case of Eruv and Tevel because of those other concerns. Kamash Malan, that he's make-el even by an egg. Let's go weiter. Tanya. Ketzad Amar Rabbi Yehuda Masna Adam. Ketzad Amar Rabbi Yehuda Masna Adam or Ketzad. The Brisa says, how does it work? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Masna Adam al Kalkala b'Yom Tov Rishon v'Okala b'Sheni. That Rabbi Yehuda says that a person makes a conditional statement on the first day on this basket of fruit, and then he can eat it on the second day. So how you of, or really the Gemara, this is the end of the question. How did Rabbi Yehuda, in practical terms, tell you to do this? So how you of shtei kalkalo shel tevel. If a person had in front of him two baskets of tevel, one on the left side and one on the right side. Omer im hayom chol ulamachar kodesh tehezu truma alzu. He says as follows, look, if today is not Rosh Hashanah, but it's a day of Chol, right? So then I want to tithe right now. And therefore, the basket on the right shall act as Truma for the basket on the left. V'im hayom kodesh ulamachar chol ein b'dvarei klum. And if today is Rosh Hashanah, then my words are meaningless. I don't mean to tithe today because I'm not allowed to tithe today. The kodem, the korei aleh Hashem, umenicha. And therefore, you make this declaration and you put the baskets aside. The following day you come, second day Rosh Hashanah, and you say, look, if today is a weekday, then my tithing takes place today. And if today is Rosh Hashanah, then it turns out that yesterday was my tithe, and therefore I'm not doing anything today. The Korei Aleh Hashem v'ochla, you make the declaration, and then you can go ahead and eat the produce, because mimon avshach, it was tithed. It was either tithed yesterday, or it was tithed today. Rabbi Yossi oser, but Rabbi Yossi prohibits this. And Rabbi Yossi went even one step further, and he said you can't even do this conditional tithing when it's 2 days of Pesach or 2 days of Shavuos. Now that's a bizarre statement, because even though we have an argument from Rabbi Yossi to explain why Rosh Hashanah should be Kedusha Echas, there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason why anyone, including Rabbi Yossi, should say that Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golios, 2 days Pesach or 2 days Shavuos, should be considered to be Kedusha Echas, and you shouldn't be, and there's no reason why you shouldn't allow this. So the Gemara is going to tell us a story. Hahu bar Tavya da asala be Reish Galusa de itzit b'Yom Tov Rishon Shel Golios the ishtachit b'Yom Tov Sheni. There was once a deer. The deer was trapped by Gentiles on the first day of Yom Tov, and it was shechted on the second day. And they wanted to feed it to the house of the Reish Galusa. Rav Nachman and Rav Chizda achlu, Rav Sheshes lo achal. So Rav Nachman and Rav Chizda ate the deer. They said it's perfectly fine. And Rav Chizda refused to eat. So it makes sense why Rav Nachman and Rav Chizda ate it, because mimon avshach, even though it was trapped on Yantiv and it should be considered to be muktzah, but if it's 2 days Yantif, so then either yesterday was Yantif and therefore today is Chol and it's mutter, or yesterday was Chol and today is Yantif, in which case it was trapped on a weekday, so it's perfectly fine. So that explains the rationale why it would make sense to eat it. So Amar Rav Nachman, Maya Avid Leila Rav Sheshes Lo Achel Bisr de Tavya. So Rav Nachman said, what can I do? Why is Rav Sheshes not eating something, the deer, on the second day of Yontif when it's perfectly permitted? So Amalei Rav Sheshes, Vehechi Echol, the Tani Isa, Amri La Isi Tani. He says, Rav Sheshes says, well, how can I eat it? Because Isi had taught the Brisa, and some say that he said it as a question, or as a rhetorical question. Did not Isi teach in a Brisa? V'chein haya Rabbi Yossi Yosef b'shnei yomim tovim shel Galios. That Rabbi Yossi had said, not only does Rosh Hashanah have the din of Kedusha Echas, but even the 2 days Pesach, 2 days Shavuos, 2 days Sukkot, that also has the din of Kedusha Echas, and therefore you can't do the tithing thing to have the fruit on the second day of Yom Tov. So it should also be usher to have this deer on the second day of Yom Tov. So Amar Rava umay kusha. So Rava says, I don't know what was bothering Rav Sheshes. I have another way of interpreting that brisa that quotes Rabbi Yossi. Dil mahachi kamer v'chein haya Rabbi Yossi oser b'shnei yomim tovim shel Rosh Hashanah bagola. Because maybe when Rabbi Yossi was talking about Yom Tov Sheni shel Golios, he wasn't talking about 2 days Pesach, 2 days Shavuos. He was talking about a 2-day Rosh Hashanah in the diaspora. So the Gemara says, Ihachi shel Golios, bagolami ba'ilei. So the Gemara says, no, 1 second. If he's not talking about a holiday, which is exclusively a 2-day holiday in the diaspora, such as Pesach, Sukkot, and Shavuos, but rather he's talking about Rosh Hashanah, which is celebrated both in Eretz Yisrael as 2 days sometimes, and in the diaspora as 2 days, then he shouldn't have said Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golios, which implies that it's only celebrated outside of Eretz Yisrael as 2 days. He should have said Rosh Hashanah that takes place in the diaspora, not Shel Golios, but Bagola. And therefore the language doesn't work out according to that. Amar Ravasi umay kushya. So Ravasi says, but still you can teach Rav Yossi in a way where he's not going to be machmir on 2 days Pesach, 2 days Shavuos, because Dil Ma'achi Kamer, because maybe he means to say as follows. V'chein hoyer Rabbi Yossi osa iser shnei yomim tovim shel Golios, ki shnei yomim tovim shel Rosh Hashanah l'Rabbanan disharu. That maybe the way you interpret Rabbi Yossi is as follows. That Rabbi Yossi assigned the status of 2 days Pesach, 2 days Shavuos in the same level of prohibition that the Chachamim assigned to 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. Remember, the Chachamim are Rabbi Yehuda of our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says that 2 days Rosh Hashanah have the status of Shtei Kedushos, have the status of 2 holy days. So all Rabbi Yossi meant to say is that the 2 days of Pesach and 2 days of Shavuos have the same level of Isser as the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, according to my opponents, the Chachamim. Now, this is a very contrived way of interpreting the Rabbi Yossi statement. But Rashi explains that because it was clear to the Chachamim that there is no rhyme or reason to say that the Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golios should have a din of Kedusha Echas, they knew that Rabbi Yossi couldn't be taken literally, because Rabbi Yossi is always correct. And since we always strive to reconcile Rabbi Yossi with the halacha, we had to kvetch a pshat in Rabbi Yossi to make it consistent with how we paskin. So even though this is extremely contrived, the way that we're interpreting Rabbi Yossi's words, we'll kvetch as much as we can in order to make it work. So the Gemara says, Ashkechei, very amusing story. Ashkechei Rav Sheshes l'Rabbi Bar Shmuel. Once, shortly after this episode happened, where Rav Sheshes refused to eat the deer meat on the second day of Yontif, he finds Rabbi Bar Shmuel and he says, Amar le tani mar midi b'kedushos. Rabbi Bar Shmuel, you are famous for quoting brises. Tell me something that you've learned in a brisa about Kedushas Yontif. So Amar le tanina moda Rabbi Yossi b'shnei yomim tovim shel Golios. So he said, I have a brisa where Rabbi Yossi admits that the 2 days Pesach, 2 days Shavuos in Chutz La'aretz has the status of Shtei Kedushos, and therefore you can always eat the thing on the second day of Yom Tov. So Amar le, so Rav Sheshes is in trouble. Rav Sheshes was machmir previously. He says, I mashkachas lahu lo teima lahu v'lo midi. Do me a favor, Rabbi Bar Shmuel. If you ever run into Rav Nachman or Rav Chisda, don't tell him that brisa, because I don't want them to know. I'm embarrassed. I don't want them to know that I was wrong, that I was machmir unnecessarily. Now, Amar Rav Ashi lididi Amar li amemar hahu bar tabi alav ititzu deitzid ela michutz latchum asa. So Rav Ashi says, I have a whole different version of the whole story. The story that was just quoted for you about, the deer that was trapped on the first day Yontif and they ate it on the second day Yontif, that's not how the story went at all. The story was that it was just one day Yontif, and it didn't have to do with eating it on the second day Yontif. An animal was brought in from outside the Tchum on Yontif, and they wanted to eat it on that day. And the argument that Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda made to permit the animal to shechten on that day is because man da'achal savar haba bishvil Yisrael zeh mutar Yisrael acher. The argument was as follows: this animal was brought from the outside the Tchum for the Reish Galusa. It wasn't brought in specifically for me. Now, since the whole prohibition of using something that comes from outside the Tchum is only a rabbinic in nature, then the only time it's Asr Midrabanan is if it was brought from outside the Tchum specifically for me. Then the Chachamim said that it's Asr. But if it was brought for someone else, then it's not Asr for me. So Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda felt perfectly justified in eating it. Uman delo achol, so why did Rav Sheshis not eat it? Savar called the Asi lebei Reish Galusa daita dekulu Rabbanan Asi. It's because the people who brought it for the Reish Galusa said, we know the Reish Galusa is going to be feeding a number of guests, a number of rabbis, so they had in mind to bring it for anyone who was going to be eating at the Reish Galusa's table. And that includes Rav Nachman, includes Rav Chisda, includes Rav Sheshis, and that's why Rav Sheshis felt that it wasn't appropriate to eat it, because it was being brought for him. V'ha'ashkechei Rav Sheshis l'Rabbi Bar Shmuel v'amar lei. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute, how can you tell me that that's the version of the story? Didn't we just have this story about Rav Sheshis telling Rabbi Bar Shmuel, tell me your brisa, and then he tells him that Rav Yossi holds that it's Shtei Kedushos, and Rav Sheshis got embarrassed and said, don't tell them. So how can you tell me that that was not the story at all, but it only happened for one day Yantif? The Gemara says, Lo hayudvarim me olam. The Gemara says that story never happened. And according to Rav Ashi's version of the story, there never was such a maisa that Rav Sheshis heard a brisa that contradicted him and told him not to tell it to anyone. That never happened. We'll hold it here for